Mhm. Okay, hello everybody. We are live and it's a great pleasure for me to be here. However, my guest, Anngwyn St, just isn't with me. And I don't know why. We have a huge staff. Hundreds of people here in the office are reaching out right now. Actually, I wish I did. I don't have a big staff of people, and I'm not sure how to get a hold of Anngwyn at the moment. I hope she's okay. We'll have to reschedule the event with her probably, or she may yet join us. Maybe she's just running late and we'll hear from her. But in the meanwhile, here I am. And it's been a month since the last live stream event. So there have been some new things going on the New Thinking Aloud channel. I know we have at least a small group of people with us live right now. And this is an opportunity for people, if you want, we can have a small group discussion or whatever. If you have questions or issues, I am not really able to answer questions in behalf of Anngwyn. She is a specialist in traumatology and has developed her own unique theories about the fractal patterns in trauma, which we've done videos about. So you can view those videos, but unfortunately, I don't really feel qualified to answer questions that might have otherwise been directed towards Anngwyn. But you can talk to me about unidentified aerial phenomenon. You can ask me tough questions. You can ask any questions you like right now. And while we're here together, and I'll keep the live stream going for as long as it appears as if there's sufficient interest, perhaps another 90 minutes, I'll be happy to answer your questions. So I realize that I'm not Anngwyn, and I wish she were here with us, but she's not. So here we go. And I don't know, I suppose I could check and peek and see how many people are in. 46 concurrent viewers. It's a little slow start. We haven't done it on a Saturday evening in the United States before. Our hope was to reach the Asia Pacific market where it is now Sunday morning. What else can I say to keep things going in the hope that Anngwyn will join us or that we'll develop an interesting conversation here? I might mention that just Friday, I introduced a new format in the in-presence monologues. Not only am I talking to my own doppelganger, but I've really found a way to take the succession of psychological states of awareness that occur in meditation and put them into words and develop something. I thought at first it might be poetry, or I thought, well, it could be instructions for the viewers to enter into the same states of consciousness that I was trying to describe with these short 1 or 2 word phrases. Actually, lately I've been thinking it could be something else. Instead, it could be a trigger for viewers to use the chain of associations to enter into their own stream of consciousness. Well, here's a question coming in from Brian Kramer, who asks, what do you think about the latest government revelations about unidentified aerial phenomena? That's so funny. I was typing the question when I said the exact words. Yeah, it's been all over the news now, actually for several years. There have been government revelations. Leslie Kane, who has been interviewed on New Thinking Aloud, talks about it. It's very clear that more and more information is being leaked out. And I think the official opinion by government experts who are studying this phenomenon is that it's not of this planet. It's not, by which they mean it's this technology doesn't belong to our government or any other government that we know of, whether it came from hyperspatial beings or from beings from another planet, or could it possibly be that there's some sort of, as Jason Giorgi has speculated and others have speculated, a breakaway civilization, an unknown society here on this planet in physical space that we know, not hyperspace, that are producing these vehicles? Or could they be psychokinetic projections, which was the hypothesis that I developed in my book, The PK Man? And there's good evidence, I think, that all of these possibilities or some combination thereof are occurring. But my basic take on the phenomenon is that we, as a human race, are entering into a new stage. We're on the cusp of an era in which you might say we're preparing to join the galactic community. But we're not yet ready to do that. We're not yet sufficiently sophisticated in terms of our scientific understandings, our understandings of consciousness, and certainly our technological abilities. But it seems to me that we need to evolve on all of these dimensions. And once we've done that, if we don't destroy ourselves in the process, humanity might enter, as I say, into the community of spacefaring intelligent civilizations. Here is a question from Carl Mids, who says, can I interview Travis Walton? You know, I actually did interview Travis Walton, now that I think about it, many, many years ago. I think it was when I was doing interviews on the Wisdom Radio Network. I didn't even know he's still around. I also have interviewed Professor Leo Sprinkle, who, as I recall, worked with Travis Walton. Brian has asked a follow-up question. So, are space aliens here to save us? They seem to hover over caches of nuclear weapons. One Air Force official said he was convinced they were trying to get us to get rid of all our nuclear weapons. There certainly is that suggestion, Brian, but I don't have a definitive answer. And I don't think, to be honest, that we're dealing with a single phenomenon, with a single purpose and a single origin. So my best take on it is there are probably multiple causes for the phenomenon and multiple reasons why they're here. Laura Newbert, one of our volunteers, asks, what effect does consciousness have on the unidentified aerial phenomena? It would be nice if we had a definitive answer to that question. I've been exploring it now for many decades, and I can't claim to know the extent to which consciousness is involved. When I worked with Ted Owens, as I documented in The PK Man, he told me he was going to create UFO appearances, and UFO appearances did occur. But did he actually create them, or did he do as he suggested, which was to send a telepathic message to the space intelligence beings, giant mantid creatures who lived in an invisible UFO hovering over the earth? Or was it precognition? Those are still unanswered questions. Leave it to Beavis says, is there a metaphysical angle to intrusive thoughts? What an interesting question. And I've been pondering that a bit lately. Rudolf Steiner, who was a great Austrian mystic and metaphysical teacher, maintained that all of our thoughts are actually spiritual entities in and of themselves. And as I began digging more deeply into Steiner's metaphysics, I think what he meant, and I could be wrong, I'm not a Steiner scholar or Steiner expert, but I've been influenced by Rudolf Steiner's work. Here's what I think he meant. Steiner seemed to see the supersensible worlds or the spiritual worlds as dominated by some very imposing beings, the major one being Christ, but also Lucifer and also Ahriman, the ancient Persian deity, who is regarded as my friend Jason Giorgi used to refer to him as angry man. So Ahriman is thought of as very dark and destructive deity. Lucifer is considered a very witty, active, vibrant, engaging deity, not heavy and dark as much as Ahriman. In fact, Lucifer, some people think of as a god of light. That's what the name Lucifer means. He's associated with the morning star Venus. In any case, Steiner thought both Lucifer and Ahriman are devoid of love, and that's what the spirit of Christ represented to him. So, and there are a few other minor spiritual figures in Steiner's cosmology, but the idea being that the intrusive thoughts are coming from one or another of these great spiritual entities who are engaged in a battle for the soul of humanity. However, do I subscribe to Steiner's view? I cannot say that I don't, but I cannot say that I do either. Leave it to Beavis. So I think that we should be open to the possibility that if you're experiencing intrusive thoughts, they are not your own. And for those of you who have that, maybe the best thing is don't feed them, don't encourage them, tell them to go away. Here's a question from A. Ambitious. Hi, Jeffrey. Can you reflect on the most memorable and interesting interviews you've had over the years? You've been sharing these wonderful conversations. People often ask me to do that, and it's a little difficult because there are over 1,000 interviews, and when I'm doing them, every one is the best while I'm doing it. So yes, they're all memorable, and sometimes they're all memorable for different reasons. But I can tell you this: the person who has probably influenced me the most over the years, and I did release a video with her. It's from the classic New Thinking Aloud. No, the classic original Thinking Aloud program that was aired on public television between 1986 and 2002. I released an interview with Jean Houston. And actually, in terms of my outlook on the world, I think Jean has probably had a bigger impact on me than other people have. I admire her work enormously and would encourage each and every viewer to check out the material. Jean is all over the internet, and she's been a very big and a very positive influence in my life. So I would encourage you to look into work with her. But there are many other people, of course, who I've interviewed many times. I've only interviewed Jean a few times, and those were long ago. The interviews with James Tunney on the new Thinking Aloud channel, I think, are very important. Eric Zaduri asks, Jeffrey, why do you say imagination and reality are separate? I don't know that that's quite what I said, Eric. I often distinguish between imagination and the imaginal world. I consider the imaginal world to be very real. If you're having thoughts, even if it's a pure fantasy, you're really having it. It's a real experience for you. It's not separate from reality, even if it's a fantasy. But there's a world of mental imagery, which I would say goes beyond fantasy even. It goes into what I've been calling the imaginal. There's a wonderful philosopher named Henri Corbin who expanded on this idea of the imaginal world. You find it developed very extensively in Sufism. As a matter of fact, Corbin based his writings on I think it was a 12th century Sufi master who developed this idea. But you find it in Kabbalah, you find it in many, many mystical traditions that there is, in fact, let's call it a spiritual world. It's not, doesn't exist in three-dimensional time, space, and with our one dimension of time. It doesn't exist in four-dimensional space-time. It exists in hyperspace, but it's real. And it's different than fantasy. It's different than physical reality. It is another category altogether. Jason Giorgi at one time referred to that as spectral, the spectral revolution, the acknowledgement of the reality of the spectral world. Naphthalene, DN, says, oh, speaking of Jason, are you going to interview Jason Giorgi on his new book, Closer Encounters? Well, you're bringing up a topic which is very troubling to me, but Naphthalene, since you've raised the issue of Jason, let me say a few things. He's been interviewed on this channel more than any other guest, I think like 36 times. And I'd say by and large, they're among the most popular interviews on this channel. And I have been a big proponent of Jason and his work, even at times in which he has been heavily criticized by other people for a wide variety of reasons. But I reached a limit about a year ago with Jason because he was advocating an all-out war against China. He was advocating that we have to make war against China to the point where they'll be on their knees and it will never be able to get up again, which sounded to me like, all-out nuclear war. And I felt that he's certainly welcome to his opinion, but I don't share that opinion. And I wanted to make it very clear to all the viewers that that is not an opinion that I share with Jason. I have many reasons for not agreeing with that opinion. First and foremost is that I don't believe in war. I'm a pacifist. I think war is evil. Jason doesn't. Jason seems to think that humanity won't progress without war. So I posted an in-presence monologue in which I voiced my disagreement with Jason's calling for war. In fact, I called it a warmongering, and I think it is. In fact, I think it would be hard to come up with a better definition of warmongering than to put a post on social media, or I think in this case it was in the context of an interview, a YouTube video interview, calling for the total destruction of Chinese civilization. So Jason took umbrage at that. And I think it caught him by surprise. He was shocked that I would do such a thing because I've been such a strong supporter of Jason. And he has basically had nothing positive to say about me. He's made a number of personal comments about me at that point, and he has dropped out of communication. I would be happy to be back into communication with Jason, but it hasn't happened. Where we've left things is that he's welcome to come back on New Thinking Aloud when he's ready. And when he does, my intention is let's have the conversation. Is war an evil or is war a good thing? It would be a very interesting discussion. And if he thinks that he can defend that point of view against a pacifist, well, he's welcome to. And he thinks that pacifism is totally ridiculous because, after all, what would you do if somebody were raping your mother? That's the usual argument against pacifism. So yes, Jason is welcome to come back on New Thinking Aloud when he's ready, and we'll have that conversation, and we can have other conversations as well. But so far, he's shown no inclination whatsoever to do that. And c'est la vie. It's a big world out there. Mary Hitchcock says, what is your take on the relationship of AIG, which I think she means general artificial intelligence, as it relates to consciousness, and why is it not addressed during conversations on Neuralink or with Ben Goertzel? Well, we have done a couple interviews with Ben Goertzel, but we haven't really probed that issue about artificial general intelligence and its relationship to consciousness. But I think the interviews I have done with Ben on robots and telepathy and robots and reincarnation is precisely addressing that point. Now that I think about it, although precisely, yes, but not explicitly. And Ben is, I think the position that he expressed is that it's quite possible that robots could reincarnate or express telepathy, which would mean that, yes, they would be conscious. They would have self-consciousness. That at least he sees that as a possibility that we cannot yet rule out. Laura Newbert asks, what area of parapsychology may be best to study as a novice? You know, there's so many different areas of parapsychology. If you're interested in pursuing the experience of clairvoyance, extrasensory perception, and precognition, I would suggest you study remote viewing. There are lots of people in the remote viewing community, members of the International Remote Viewing Association, for example, who are not people with college degrees. They're everyday people who want to practice this skill and apply it. And they do interface with the academic community. So I think remote viewing is a very good place for novices to begin to get involved in the field. But obviously, it depends on the inclination of the particular individual. Some people may be more drawn to attending seances and studying mediums. I think I would really ultimately give you the advice that Joseph Campbell gave when I interviewed him and said, what would you like to say to the young people? And he said, follow your passion. So ultimately, that you won't go wrong if you try to become the very best version of yourself. And wherever that takes you, it's going to be a good place. Ja Universe says, what would or could you prophesize about these times, or what prophecies you believe to be real? You know, Ja Universe, I did do an in-presence monologue on the distinction between precognition and prophecy. And they're not quite the same, especially when it comes to religious terms. I think prophecy usually says something like this: if you don't change your ways, some terrible things are going to happen. That's a prophecy. And boy, oh boy, I could go through a long list right now. If we don't clean up the environment, if we don't handle the climate change situation, if we continue to have a political matrix going on in the US, a two-party political system in which one party is casting doubt on the very validity of the system itself, you're going to have big, big, big problems. So we're heading, headlong towards a big precipice. We're likely to fall over. Now, that is not a precognition of whether we will, in fact, go over the precipice. I'm enough of an optimist to think that we have the possibility of turning things around, but ultimately we have to deal with human nature. And human nature itself has shown itself to be quite problematic. If you look back on the 5,000 years or so of recorded history of which we know about, there's been innumerable examples of catastrophes, injustices, oppression, war, and any number of human stupidities. So are we capable of overcoming our own nature? Maybe not. I mean, we live in a big universe. There are billions of galaxies, and the galaxies each have billions of stars. So there are potentially billions of planets out there with civilizations like our own. And I can only imagine that many civilized life forms do not survive, that they end up, in effect, being the instruments of their own extinction. And it looks like if we don't change our ways, that's where we're headed. Willie Bond, 0007, says, the man who invented the Xerox machine heard voice. I know you're referring to Chester Carlson. Most religions are founded by those who heard voices. The question is, who do you know who you are hearing? It's a good question. And ultimately, the answer depends upon an intuitive ability known as discernment. It's a spiritual ability, the ability to discern good from evil, the ability to discern right from wrong, the ability to discern beauty from ugliness and truth from falsehood. That's up to each individual. Just because you hear a voice doesn't mean you have to pay attention to that voice. You have to use your own ability to discern. There are plenty of examples of people who acted on voices without discerning. And many of those people are in jail today because they listened to the wrong voices. Aaron Gannon says, what are my thoughts about Kriya Yoga, Qigong of the spine, which equals clears karma on the spine? Well, Aaron, you seem to know a lot more about it than me. I've never been a practitioner of Kriya Yoga. I know there are different schools of thought that say that they are the practitioners of Kriya Yoga. For example, the followers of Yogananda, the Self-Realization Fellowship people. I did do some lengthy interviews with Dr. Close, William Close, who was a physicist who belongs to that organization and practices Kriya Yoga. So To the best of my knowledge, it's a good practice, but I don't have many other thoughts about it. I can't really speak to you as an expert on Kriya Yoga. Christopher Michael would love to know where the Following Your Bliss interview was. Any help? You know what? The problem with that is it was a wonderful interview with Joseph Campbell. Some people have said it's the best interview Joseph Campbell ever gave. However, after Joseph Campbell died, an organization called the Joseph Campbell Foundation asserted that they had all the rights to everything related to Joseph Campbell. And even though we had a signed release form from him, we were threatened with lawsuits by the Joseph Campbell Foundation. And as a result, we have withdrawn that video from public circulation because this was, of course, many, many years ago. I'm talking about the old, original Thinking Aloud production company, which is run by my former business partner, Arthur Block. He owns that company now. But in any case, we had to, he felt, I don't want to say we had to, we had a choice. We didn't have to go along with the request, but we didn't want to waste our time and energy on some kind of protracted legal battle, and we were being threatened. Even though we felt we were in the right, we decided just to give in and withdraw that interview. So it is not available. However, Joseph Campbell repeated that phrase over and over again on many, many different forums. And you know, if you spend any amount of time listening to old interviews with Joseph Campbell, you'll come upon him encouraging people to follow their bliss. Kay asks, Jeff, do you believe in the concept of a soul group? I'm very favorably disposed to the concept of the soul group, but I can't say that I have any evidence for it. So to the extent that I might have belief based on evidence, no, I don't. If it's a question of, are there people who write about soul groups for whom I have a lot of respect? Yes, Jane Roberts writes about it extensively in the Seth material, particularly The Education of Oversoul 7. A novel is a very graphic description of what a soul group might be like. Also, the writings of the great psychical researcher, FWH, Frederick William Henry Myers, the author of Human Personality and Its Survival of Bodily Death. He apparently dictated 2 books from the afterlife after his death. He died in, I think, about 1902 or so, 1903 maybe. And after his death, in fact, many years, decades after his death, it appears as if he may well have dictated 2 books about the afterlife through the auspices of an automatic writer named Geraldine Cummins. One of those, I've done some monologues about those books, as a matter of fact. One of them was called Human Personality and Beyond, and the other one was called The Road to Immortality. And in there, he does talk about soul groups. He said you could be, as you arrive in the afterlife and go through various levels, you'll come upon the level of the soul group. And it might be you're in a soul group with 20 other souls, or it might be 1,000. He wrote, I'm very favorably disposed to thinking about it. But as I say, I'm not aware of any really good evidence. I don't even know, to be honest. I haven't thought about it deeply enough as to what evidence in support of a soul group would even look like. I mean, take Jane Roberts' novel, The Education of Oversoul 7. Let's suppose that that's how it works. What kind of evidence could we ever get that would support that vision of the world? It's a good question to think about. Aina Eithne asks, have you seen or heard of evidence of teleportation of objects by the living? I'm going to just get a quick drink of water here. Probably the most prominent examples of teleportation of objects would be the case of Satya Sai Baba, the Hindu guru. I believe he's now deceased, I could be wrong about that, who was well known for teleporting. In fact, I knew one of his devotees quite well, Gay Luce. I interviewed her in years past, a brilliant biofeedback researcher, a wonderful woman, and a dear friend. In fact, I actually ended up buying a house that she lived in at one time. And she once told me this story about a woman who had come to see Satya Sai Baba, and she had a ring, and it was like, let's say it was an emerald ring, and he waved his hand over it. And when she looked again, it was no longer an emerald, it was a turquoise or a ruby. A ruby would be as valuable as an emerald, I think. Something like that. She's amazed. And he said to her, it is easier to change an emerald into a ruby than it is to change the mind of a Westerner. That would be one example, though. And there's a book all about his teleportations written by Erlander Haraldsson, parapsychologist from Iceland, who was regarded as a really brilliant, wonderful researcher. Erlander, you know what? His book is called, I'm looking it up right now so that I can tell you the name of his book if you really want to read a good book. It's called Modern Miracles. And that's about the apports and teleportations of Satya Sai Baba. There's another excellent example of apports. It would be my interview with Stanley Krippner, who did extensive research in Brazil with a medium there named Amir Ahmadin, who created many apports. They were witnessed by Stanley Krippner. In fact, today, those objects are, I believe they are now the property of the University of Winnipeg. Or is it the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, where they have a collection of these apports. There's also a collection of objects supposedly apported. I believe it's in the library of Stanford University. These are apports that were, I'm pretty sure it was the brother of the founder, Leland Stanford Jr., I think, or Leland Stanford was the founder, named after Leland Stanford Jr. But in any case, as I recall, he had a brother living in Australia who was a spiritualist and witnessed many objects being apported, and those have been donated to the Stanford University. I think it's the Art Museum has them in storage somewhere. So there's yet again another example, but probably the very best single example of apports in the modern era would be the report on the Skoll Group, which was produced by the Society for Psychical Research about 20 years ago. I have done interviews recently with Robin Foy, who is the founder of the Skoll Group. But if you get that report, it was published, it's available as a book. In fact, there's several books about it. Many, many apports were witnessed and reported, including, fascinatingly, newspapers from the 1930s 1930s, as I recall, or 1940s. I'm not offhand sure which, but this happened in the 1990s. So they're 50-year-old newspapers. And when they were apported, they were like brand new. But according to experts who studied them, they were the original newspapers from decades earlier. So, and many other objects apported by the Skoll group. So it's a wonderful question. And I guess in short, the answer is that there's enormous evidence in favor of apports. And Ancio Helak says, is there any film footage of these apports? And yes. Now, I don't think there's film footage of the apports actually being apported, appearing in midair and dropping to the floor as they typically do. Stanley Krippner tried very hard to get that on film and was unable to. But there's a wonderful video by Dan Drazen. It is available on Vimeo, and it is called, what is Dan Drazen video? Let me see if I can find the name of it. It is well worth watching if you're interested in apports, or if you're interested in electronic voice phenomenon, if you're interested in the Skoll group. Let's see. It's called Dan Drazen's videos, Calling Earth with Dan Drazen. I think that's the name of it. Yes, Calling Earth, and it's on Vimeo. If you want to see and learn more about apports, that would be a wonderful video to see. I highly recommend it. I've known Dan Drazen for well over 30 years. He is an excellent filmmaker and journalist, and I think an individual of the highest integrity. So he's reporting on very, very bizarre events, but as far as I'm concerned, they're quite legitimate. And Steve Stanel asks, what was my all-time favorite movie? For many years, if you had asked me that question, Steve, I would have said El Topo, a movie by Alejandro Jodorowsky that came out in like 1969, 1970, and was only shown at midnight. It was sort of a cult classic. It got withdrawn. I think it is currently available again. And I love Jodorowsky's movies. He's still making movies. He's about 90 years old, and he continues to make movies. He's a surrealist filmmaker, and I'm very, very fond of his work. But not all great movies have to be surrealist from my point of view. I've actually really enjoyed Dr. Zhivago. Is an old film, I believe it won the Academy Award, was another of my favorite movies. So there you have a couple. Okay, I'll give you one more, Fellini's Satyricon, another surrealistic movie. I greatly enjoy Fellini and Bergman as well. The Ultimate Reality asks, do I have views on the philosophy and work of Osho? Could we have an interview relating the work of Osho? Osho is the name used by Bhagavan Rajneesh, as I recall. I did some interviews on the question of spiritual tyranny, in which Osho was discussed. There's been, a lot of controversy surrounding this guy and the many Rolls Royces that he got his followers to purchase for him, and the fact that he used in his various spiritual teachings violence as a spiritual technique. So I have to say, he's not necessarily my favorite. I think he's a brilliant writer. I know many people who have been influenced by him in a positive way. I've interviewed some of those people. So maybe it deserves a second look. My friend Ted Ban, who was a sociologist at the university, at York University in Toronto, wrote a book about Osho. And Ted has departed, but let me see if I can find that book and I can refer you to it. It's W. Edward Mann and his book. He wrote a wonderful book about Wilhelm Reich called Orgon, Reich, and Eros. It was very influential. And let's see, his book on Osho. You know what? Let me see. I'm going to have to see if I can find it here. And it's apparently a paper, a comparative study of the Rajneesh Osho movement. No, I'm not able to locate the book, sorry. But he would be, from a sociological point of view, the person I would go to get, the real poop on Osho. Not that if you think of Osho as a spiritual teacher, you're going to get the real poop from a sociologist. But I'll move on before I put my foot into my mouth. Mr. E says, is the chakra system a placebo system, in my opinion, or something else? I'm going to tell you, I think it's something else. I don't think the chakra system is by any means a placebo. I think homeopathy might be a placebo. I think, and it's not a bad thing. The placebo effect is one of the strongest effects we know in all of medicine. So if the chakra system were only a placebo, that would still give it, to my way of thinking, enormous validity. But here's what I think you can say about the chakra system. It actually is a large system that includes all of Western psychology in it. You've got, for example, the sexual chakras, the Svadhisthana chakra. That's Freudian psychology, where he talks about the libido and the sex drive and how important that is in the human psyche. Then Alfred Adler's work on the will to power, well, that would be the next chakra up, the Manipura chakra. And he also talked about, Adler in his psychology, the will toward altruism. That's the heart chakra. So then you've got the throat chakra, having to do with the ability to communicate with people. The third eye chakra is all your parapsychology. The 1,000-petaled lotus at the top of the head is your openness to infinity. These are very real human experiences that are all contained in the chakra system. I've done a wonderful interview about the chakra system with my good friend Debashish Banerjee, who is a professor and a dean at the California Institute of Integral Studies. So I think that there's an enormous body of wisdom contained inside the chakra system. Emmy Vadnais, one of our volunteers, says, what do you feel are the ultimate benefits for society when parapsychology becomes more accepted? Well, I happen to be of the viewpoint, as I expressed earlier, that we have to develop our capacities to accept and understand and integrate parapsychology before humanity will be qualified to enter into the galactic community of spacefaring civilizations. So that would be one benefit. I think that could occur. That's not to mention the benefits of people being able to actualize what in yoga has been known as the siddhis. There are any number of capacities. Parapsychologists talk about clairvoyance, clairaudience, telepathy and precognition, retrocognition, and so on. But those are just a couple of words there. You could say almost limitless capacities of the human mind. We don't have words yet for all of them that can open up for people. We are, in my view, like larvae, like maybe to put it a little more nicely, we are like caterpillars. We're like caterpillars. And when parapsychology truly becomes integrated into the human community, we will be like butterflies. That it will be that big of a transformation for human beings. My friend Jason has at one time said, history as we know it will end, yes, but a whole new history is likely to begin. Christopher Michael says, Dr. Mishlove, to change the subject a little, if you are willing, to help some of us who are new to the channel or not, in the shortest way to lead by example, how can we remain optimistic these days? Oh boy, I could give you a lot of glib answers to that. It's not just about being optimistic, it's about being happy. One way would be, and I've recently gone through a process about this myself, to look clearly at the evidence for life after death, because sure, we're all doomed to die. There's very good reason for pessimism, especially if you're a materialist, because when you're dead, you're dead. That's it, no more. No return, you'll never come back. But if you study the data, the empirical data for reincarnation, for transmediumship, and other evidence of life after death, near-death experience is another important area. Possession, direct voice communication, electronic voices, and on and on. If you study all of that, you come to the conclusion that death is not the end. So there's a source of optimism. Even if humanity is doomed, even if the human race is about to jump off of a cliff of our own making, which very well might be the case, that's not going to be the end of you or me. The evidence is pretty clear for those who bother to look at it carefully. So I regard that as a reason for optimism. I know there are people amongst the viewers who would regard it as a reason for pessimism. Oh my gosh, you mean I can't just end it all? I got to come back. Some people would prefer to simply go into oblivion. And if you're one of those people, well, then materialism might be just the answer for you. You can experience oblivion for a while. Fleming Rosenwald asks, how do you think the New Age movement stands today? The New Age movement, I'm not really quite sure how to define it. It's such an amorphous, big thing. My old partner in the original Thinking Aloud series, Arthur Bloch, was a humorist, and he used to pronounce it newage, to rhyme with sewage. He had a very low opinion of the New Age movement. And in some regards, that's understandable. Like any other movement, it has its strengths and weaknesses. So it's a large movement. And I actually think that what we call the New Age movement today really began with Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophists in the 19th century. So it's sort of integrated with the whole Western spiritual movement. The New Age movement could be considered the study of auras and chakras and reincarnation and the importation of Buddhist philosophy and yoga into the West. So there's all of that, and those are very vibrant movements. But to the extent that we look at all of these movements, you can see that on the one hand, there are movements with great scholarship and integrity. And people who are working very hard to study these classic spiritual texts of other cultures and to make their wisdom available to modern audiences in Western cultures. On the other hand, there's a kind of debasing of these teachings that goes on. People, you might say, who back in the days when I lived in Marin County, California, there was a TV show about Marin County consciousness, and they showed this woman in a hot tub being stroked with peacock feathers, and she was saying, "I want it all. I want it all now." And that sort of represents a kind of hedonistic perversion of the authentic spiritual teachings of the perennial philosophy, perhaps. So, I guess you'd have to say there are both wings to the New Age movement, but I think it's probably fair to say that it remains a very influential movement. When I lived in San Rafael, California, I had a neighbor named Paul Ray, and it was a sociologist, and he did a lot of research. He published a book on what he called the cultural creatives. Cultural creatives was the largest growing demographic group in the United States going back, let's say, to the 80s and 90s, and probably still true. Now, the cultural creatives had two wings. They had the spiritual wing, which you could call like the New Age movement, or some people would call it the movement for secular spirituality, growing very rapidly, and I think it still is. More and more people today than ever accept life after death, but enrollment in the traditional religions is dropping. But there's also the social activist wing of the cultural creative movement, and they're very different than the spiritual wing. So I guess the New Age movement would be the spiritual wing of the cultural creatives. But according to Paul Ray's research, it's a rapidly growing movement, maybe the fastest growing movement if you include politically active people in the country. Laura Newbert, one of our volunteers, asks, how do you get rid of an egregore? And I might mention, since we're near the top of the hour, that I'll keep going for another 30 minutes or so until we reach the bottom of the hour. I'm in Mountain Time in the United States, so it'll be 7:30 p.m. my time when we quit. So how do you get rid of an egregore? The question is, I suppose to begin with, most of our viewers won't know what an egregore is. And it's not a precisely defined term. That makes it even tougher. Let's call it a thought form. How do you get rid of a thought form? In Tibetan culture, they have what they call a tulpa. And there's a wonderful book by Alexandra David Neal. It's called Magic and Mystery in Tibet, in which she talks about how through the practice of meditation, she actually created a tulpa. And the tulpa was like a person. And it got so real that everybody could see this person. It was created by thought alone. And she describes it in her book, but it became like a regular member. She was a Western woman in the early part of the 20th century who was traveling in Tibet and traveling with Tibetans and studying their traditions. And she said, but after a while, this tulpa became bothersome. He began to develop a temper. He was getting angry at people. He was causing disruptions. So they had to work to get rid of it. And I'm pretty sure it took some ritual activity. It was not a simple matter to get rid of the tulpa that was created that way. But there are many other kinds of tulpas. They're not all created deliberately through Tibetan rituals and meditation procedures. Some tulpas are probably created accidentally. You might even say that religions themselves create tulpas. Our various deities, daemons, devas, asuras, etc., could all be tulpas, some of them created by folklore over time and history. So I don't have an easy answer. I'm not an exorcist by any means. And I don't necessarily even subscribe to exorcism or have any reason to think that that's a good approach. But I do know that there are many people who are skilled at dispersing negative energies. Let's put it that way. And if you have negative energies, if you feel surrounded by negative energies, there are any number of positive techniques that you can use. I happen to be a big believer in the use of affirmations. And I've done in-presence monologues about them. I would refer you in particular, I think, to some of the early monologues, the first 6 of the in-presence monologues. And for those of you who are new to this channel, check out the listings. You'll see under my name, these in-presence monologues, and they go into great detail about the use of self-hypnosis, the use of affirmations, for programming your mind. If you create around yourself atmosphere which is totally positive, then you'll find that you're attracting to yourself external energies from both the spiritual worlds and the physical world that resonate with the positive atmosphere you create about yourself. I am asks another easy question: how to transcend the ego? Let me refer you to an interview that I recently released with Peter Russell, Letting Go of Letting Go. Oh, here, I'm going to come back to the egregores because one of our listeners or viewers, Willie Bond, 0007, says, say go away and never come back 3 times. In terms of egregores or other forms of negative energy. And I have heard that advice elsewhere. I think it probably works a goodly percentage of the time. But how to transcend the ego? So I did this wonderful interview with Peter Russell. He said, let go of letting go. Because if you try to force yourself to I am going to get rid of my ego, that's not going to work. You reinforce it. Actually, I'm so smart. Look at me. I've transcended my ego. I think you have to, develop a healthy relationship with your ego. You don't want to transcend your ego. You got to be able to make your bed and tie your shoes. But what you do want to do is eliminate certain bad habits in your behavior that we often associate with the negative ego, with the dark side of the ego, with the narcissistic ego, for example. And again, don't fight with your ego. You really got to be very gentle with yourself when it comes to this transcending business. Kay asks, what do you believe to be the best evidence of human personality, survival of death? Let me recommend to you that you view a couple of the videos. One of them was done with Vernon Neppe, N-E-P-P-E. You'll find it in our listings page. And you'll find the listings page if you go to newthinkingaloud.com. Right in the banner there, you'll see a link to the listings page. All of our guests, alphabetical, with all of their videos. So Vernon Neppy and I did an interview called The Chess Game from Beyond the Grave. It's a wonderful example of evidence for survival, in which Wolfgang Eisenweiss, who was an economist living in Switzerland, had the idea that we could prove life after death if we could just find a deceased chess master who is willing to play, working through a medium, a game of chess with a living grandmaster. And he actually managed to convince Korknoy, who was at the time the #2 ranked chess player in the world, to play a game of chess. And he had a friend who was a medium, automatic writing medium, Robert Rollins. So he, working with Robert Rollins and his spirit guide, he said, can you go into the spirit world and find a deceased chess master who would be willing to play a game against Korknoy? And they did. They found a chess master named Geza Maraxi, a Hungarian, who died in like 1952. And this is in the 1990s. And working through the medium, Robert Rollins, they played a game of chess. It turns out that my friend, Russell Targ, is the brother-in-law of the late brilliant chess player, maybe one of the greatest in the whole history of chess, Bobby Fischer. And this game was published in the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research back in about 2000, I think 7 or so. And so Russell was able to go to Bobby Fischer and say, here are the moves. What do you think of this chess game between Korknoy and this deceased chess master? And Bobby Fischer told them, looks like they were playing chess at the grandmaster level. I think that's excellent proof of life after death. I would also encourage you to go into the listings and check out the interviews with Roy Stemmen, Stemman. He was, for many years, the editor of Psychic News, the British newspaper of the psychic and spiritualist community in England. Several interviews with Roy about cases in which he was personally involved that are highly evidential. So there would be some good examples, and there are many, many others if you just go through the interviews that have already been released on the New Thinking Aloud channel. I bet I have 100 different interviews dealing with the question of evidence for life after death. Chris Scarpantonio asks, have you ever had any ghost or spirit experiences? Well, indeed I have, and they've changed my life, as a matter of fact. I had one very powerful experience. It occurred in a dream. My great uncle Harry Schwamm died in March of 1972. He was in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. At the time, I was in Berkeley, California, 2 hours ahead of him. He died at like early in the morning after attending religious services. It would have been even earlier for me in California. And almost at the same time as his death, he came to me in a dream. And I can tell you right now, looking back, nearly a half century, it was the most powerful dream I've ever had in my life. It was like soul penetrating. And when I awoke from that dream, I was singing and crying at the same time. I've done a whole in-presence monologue about that event. It's called, I think it's called Uncle Harry. You'll find it in one of the early monologues, My Uncle Harry. But that event inspired me. At the time, I was a graduate student in criminology at Berkeley. I was working as a volunteer at San Quentin Prison, doing in the psychiatric unit, conducting group therapy sessions with sex offenders and murderers. And after that visitation, I like to think of it, from Uncle Harry, I resolved that I needed to understand this event. And my faculty members, people, intelligent people I knew at Berkeley, one of the world's great universities, had nothing intelligent to say about life after death or parapsychology. So I resolved, excuse me for a moment, I resolved to become my own expert. That's why I created a unique, individual, interdisciplinary doctoral major for myself at Berkeley in parapsychology. And even today, over 40 years after I got a doctoral diploma in parapsychology, it remains the only accredited doctoral diploma in that field ever awarded by a university in the United States. And so the visitation from Uncle Harry at the time of his death was the catalyst for one of the major transformations of my life, from a student of criminology to a student of parapsychology. Mary Hitchcock asks, will you do live shows with questions and answers on a regular basis? For me, it would be so great to be able to bring questions to you on a weekly basis. There is nobody who has the knowledge or insight you have. Well, thank you, Mary. There are many people who have knowledge and insights that exceed my own, really. I try to bring them on as guests, and not only as guests for the regular interviews, but live stream guests, so you can pose questions to them as well. Right now, I've got many other issues going on in my life, including some family issues and medical issues. So I'm going to just do these live streams once a month for the time being. We used to do them every other week, and I would like to get back to every other week. But in terms of just me answering the questions, I'm not going to do that every week. Maybe once a quarter, I think that would be enough. Ragnar Lothbrock asks, have you ever witnessed human levitation? I would love to, and I haven't. For a while, I was very interested in the Transcendental meditation program. They called it flying. And they did claim for quite a while that people involved in what they called the TM Cities program were actually levitating. And they published photos. You'd see these people. They were still shots, of course, but it looked like they were hovering in midair. And I actually looked into it quite a bit. And my conclusion was, after investigating it and interviewing many people, that this was not levitation. This was a form of hopping. They would be on mattresses and they sort of learn how to bounce up and down on the mattress while meditating. And they could get up fairly high, sometimes almost a foot, and with a camera, get a nice picture while they're in the full lotus position, hovering, or apparently hovering, because you couldn't tell. But actually, there was never any evidence that they could maintain themselves like a helicopter, stable in midair. So that was as close as I came. I actually did release a paper at one time to the Parapsychological Association, pointing out that this claim of levitation was not substantiated. But there are claims that seem much better. For example, I have an interview with Michael Grosso, on the levitations reported of St. Joseph of Cupertino, and those were witnessed by many people. They tried to pull him down. They couldn't even pull him down. He was made a Catholic saint, and after serious investigation by Catholic officials of the church who were not favorably disposed to this saint, because he actually was engaged in austerities that were so severe, whipping his body, that he developed sores and infections, and he smelled terrible, and they thought of him as a big embarrassment. But the evidence that he actually levitated was quite substantial. Mr. E says, I was wondering if you could provide some advice with resentment and your parents. You know, a very good question, because for the most part, we are I don't want to say victims of our parents. That wouldn't be the right word, really. But let's face it, when we're young children under the age of 4, we're totally dependent upon our parents. And after all, our parents are only human beings. Even the best of parents make mistakes in raising their children, and not all parents are amongst the best. Typically, parents will project onto their children all of their own psychological issues. And in particular, what one has to be concerned about, very concerned about, is parents who project their own low self-esteem onto their children. And they do that by saying, oh, you're really stupid, or you can't do this, or you can't do that, or you're, whatever label they want to give you, you're a bad person, for example. Now, I used to be a trainer for a company called Omega Seminars. And in that seminar, it was like a 4-day program. The main point of the whole seminar is to explain to parents that they need to go back and apologize to their children for the things that they did to harm their self-esteem. Oh. You know what? I'm getting a message from Brian saying Anngwyn has been waiting for a link since 6 p.m. I sent her the link by email. Oh gosh, and it's almost time. No. Thank you for the message, Brian. Brian, if you hear me, since there are less than 15 minutes left, I did send Anngwyn an email message with the link. We'll have to reschedule. I'm so sorry that we weren't able to connect this time. I know all of our viewers were eager to have this time with Anngwyn, and she was as well. I don't know why she apparently did not receive my emails. But just rescheduling, if you have a connection with Anngwyn and can communicate with her, please let her know that I will be back in touch with her, and we will reschedule this session. At this point, it's a little too late. So I'll just continue for another 15 minutes. I don't know why she didn't get my email. Anyway, with regard to dealing with the advice, so in the Omega seminar that I trained, we encourage parents to literally apologize to their children. And when the parents came to realize what damage they may have inflicted on their own children unwittingly, simply by projecting onto their children their own psychological issues, most of those parents were in tears. But what do you do now if you're a person who realizes that your parents have inflicted their issues upon you and you feel resentful? Well, I think the best thing you can do is try to forgive them, to understand that they were doing the best that they knew how. It may not have been enough, but probably that was the best that they could do. And in the meantime, work on your own self-esteem. You know, it's true. When you were young, under 4 years old or very young, and your parents told you you're a bad person, you took it to heart. You had no way of understanding that maybe, you know, they're projecting their own problems onto you. But now, if you're an adult, you can work on that. There are many ways to work on it, through affirmations, through self-hypnosis, through psychotherapy, through meditation, but work to become your own best friend. Work to become the most positive version of yourself, and you can let go of that resentment. Chris asks, what are the main points that people of various belief systems can agree on? Well, for example, Chris, Aldous Huxley published a wonderful book called The Perennial Philosophy, and it's about the mystical traditions of every culture. Now, they're not going to be in total agreement with every single person or every single belief system, but most mystical traditions around the world believe in the soul. They believe that you have a spiritual life. In fact, most of them will believe that there's some form of existence after the death of the physical body. Of course, if you're a materialist, you may not hold any of those beliefs. But most of the spiritual beliefs hold to a whole range of beliefs that you could call the perennial philosophy. Maybe the first and foremost of those is that consciousness is fundamental, that the physical world that we experience is derived from consciousness, not the other way around. Now, suppose, though, you want to find beliefs that you might have in common with your friends who are not the least bit spiritual, who are materialist in the worst sense. Let's say materialist in being very power hungry and acquisitive. What would you have in common with them? Well, maybe even their simple things like goodness. It's good to be good, the Dalai Lama used to say. That was his main message. It's good to be good. Unfortunately, there are people who even disagree with that, people who go back to Nietzschean philosophy and say, no, we have to go beyond good and evil. What we think of goodness is actually a slave mentality. So how do you find commonality then? I'm not sure. I think that you have to accept that there are going to be differences. You know what? It looks like I'm getting an email from Anngwyn. No, I thought I did. I guess it wasn't really an email from her. So I'm so sorry, Anngwyn, if you're able to hear me now. What happened? Why we are disconnected? We'll have to sort it out later, and we will reschedule. Peggy Harris asks, what is the one thing that you once believed, but now realize you were wrong? Thank you, Peggy. That is an excellent question. You know, when I was a senior in college, actually it began when I was a junior in college, an undergraduate in the, 1967, 1968 at the University of Wisconsin, I decided to write a senior honors thesis on the psychology of religious mysticism. And at the time, I really considered myself, like most people around me, a materialist, skeptical person. I thought for sure that, people who reported seeing ghosts and having mystical experiences and altered states of consciousness and the like were obviously hallucinating or experiencing some sort of a mental disorder. So I imagined that I was going to write this thesis on all of the pathologies associated with religious mysticism. And I began the project with that in mind. As I became acquainted with the literature in the field, and in particular with the book by Abraham Maslow, the great psychologist who wrote Toward a Psychology of Being, in which he talked about mystical experiences in the context of, he called them peak experiences, but he made a point of saying they're indistinguishable from mystical experiences. And what he said was that the healthiest people he knew had these experiences. And not only that, these experiences were central to their identity. And he was talking about people we would all regard, well, I would regard, as great human beings: Albert Einstein, Eleanor Roosevelt, Helen Keller, people who were considered the thought leaders in a very positive way for humanity as a whole, that the mystical experiences they had were central to who they were in the world, and that they regarded these experiences as very important to their lives and very real. And after I read Maslow and understood his work in this regard, I gave up the notion that mysticism was a form of psychopathology. We've got 5 minutes left until the bottom of the hour. So I realize I'm not going to get to all of your questions, but I want to make a point of thanking all of you for sticking with me on this live stream. I know we've had, at this point, over 1,600 people with us, so that's very exciting. And let me take a few more questions. E.A. Natelli says, where are the people with ESP abilities? If some teachings of meditation claim to give you insight to those virtues, like Raja Yoga, why are we not seeing people have them? Well, E.A. Natelli, I guess you haven't been watching a lot of the videos on the New Thinking Aloud channel, because I've been interviewing many, many people with such abilities, most recently, Gail Hayson. There's an interview released just, I think, a week or two ago. Another interview with her is scheduled for release. Is it on Monday, as I recall? Look for the interview titled Small, Medium, at Large. Gail is a person who has been experiencing ESP all of her life. She's been tested in research laboratories. There are any number of researchers who have talked about the studies they've done using strict scientific procedures to validate ESP. So all I can assume is that you're not a regular listener yet on the New Thinking Aloud channel. But if you go to our listings page, that's where there are like over 1,000 interviews that you can link to that are presented in alphabetical order by guest. Look for some of them. These people aren't hiding. Although I will say this, it's a good idea not to necessarily try and show off your ESP abilities or brag about them necessarily. Most spiritual traditions suggest that that's an ego trap. So I think that, especially if you're looking for people who are yoga practitioners or meditators, they're not likely to make a big deal about having psychic experiences. I can say for myself, I have them on a regular basis. I don't consider them under my control. I don't even want to, for the most part, try and control them. I enjoy them coming and going as they will. And when they happen, I just think it's very nice. It's a sign that I'm on the right track. But I wouldn't go around putting up a shingle calling myself a psychic. And I think most people who are smart about it wouldn't do that, because you just attract a lot of flack, because a third of the population roughly are hardcore materialist skeptics who love to poke fun of people who say that they have psychic abilities. Why subject yourself to that? Well, we're just about at the bottom of the hour. I want to say it's been a real pleasure being with all of you. I do look forward to probably next year having more frequent live stream events, but this year I think we'll keep it to one a month between now and the end of the year. I want to encourage those of you who are with me to check out our weekly newsletter. If you want to see what's really going on the New Thinking Aloud channel, we publish a newsletter. It's free. It comes out every week. It usually has artwork and poetry and news items, and it gives you advance access to the videos that will be released in the following week. You can subscribe by going to our foundation at New Thinking Aloud. That's all one word, and aloud is spelled ALLOWED, newthinkingaloud.com. Well, newthinkingaloud.com will take you to the YouTube channel. Newthinkingaloud.org will take you to our foundation, and that's where you can sign up for our newsletter for free. So that being said, I want to thank all of you for being with me, and I will end the live stream now.